Welcome to another episode of Our City. I'm your host, Martinus Geleynse. We have an exciting episode for you today. We'll first be speaking with Huzaifa Saeed of the McMaster Student Union, speaking about youth retention, McMaster University, and the divide between the school and Hamilton. Next, we'll be speaking with Andreana Hudson of the Vintage Marketplace, a vintage lifestyle show coming to the Hamilton Convention Center soon. Thanks for joining us. This is Our City. Joining me now in studio is Huzaifa Saeed, who's the Vice President of Education for the McMaster Students Union. We're going to talk about McMaster students staying in Hamilton, not staying in Hamilton, and what can be done to make sure that they, in fact, do stay in Hamilton. So, Huzaifa, welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
So tell us, your job as Vice President of Education of the Students Union at McMaster. Describe what you do there specifically.
Right, so a lot of people don't know that my job is a full-time role on campus. So my job involves handling the university affairs, the provincial politics, as well as the federal political relations, as well as the municipal for the McMaster Students Union. So a lot of my time is spent traveling to Ottawa, to Toronto, to engage with political and federal stakeholders, but recently there's been an upsurge in terms of my responsibilities when it comes to municipal relations. So I do spend a lot of time dealing with different departments in the city, so tourism and culture, workforce planning, especially Ward 1 Councillor Brian McHattie, in kind of figuring out what is it that McMaster students need from the city. And what is it that city needs from McMaster students. So these topics could include youth retention. They could also, especially in the last year, have included a lot of talk about rental housing licensing bylaw. So that has pretty much been the scope of my responsibility when it comes to municipal relations.
It's a big job.
It is a big job,
yeah.
And it doesn't come with a lot of support, so you're pretty much on your own when dealing with all these different stakeholders, and you just have a year to figure out what's happening.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
So you mentioned youth retention, and one of the big, I would say, issues that's been identified in the last little while through a number of organizations, in fact, including McMaster, is what seems to be a real divide between McMaster University and the city of Hamilton. And that's seen in a number of different ways: participation of the school in various programs and events downtown, but also in how the students are exploring the city, getting off the campus, and then finally in staying in the city after graduation. So perhaps you can explain from the McMaster point of view and from what you see in your position, how is the divide between the school and the city right now as you see it?
Yeah, I think the divide between the students of McMaster and the city of Hamilton has been a historic one. I don't think 2013 is a unique year in that sense. Like, this has always been the case. People have always had a perception of Hamilton because people come to McMaster from a number of countries, a number of provinces, a number of cities, and a lot of them did, from anecdotal evidence, like a lot of them, their first image of Hamilton has always been that travel down QEW towards Niagara Falls, and what they see is on the Skyway Bridge they've seen the factories. A lot of them actually haven't gone down to the McMaster area until they came to McMaster or came here for a summer tour, and I think that's like the starting point of the misperceptions a lot of students have had of McMaster. I guess like a large part of it is also the geographical element. So some universities in Canada are situated right downtown, so people are forced to interact with the city, whereas for us, we're almost like an isolated little bubble, the West Hill Ainslewood bubble, and that's a term that's been used for decades, where people have no need to go outside it. And when they do, it's always the same few locations. So it could be Lock Street, it could be perhaps the waterfalls occasionally, or most likely Hess Village on the weekend. And so we did a survey in 2011 called Your City Survey, and over 1,100 students filled it out. And there was an overwhelming number of students who had a lot of negative views of Hamilton. So just as one of the most glaring numbers out of it was that 78% of students said that Hamilton would not be the first place to look for jobs after graduation. A lot of them had identified that when they look for a city to live in, they look at transit, they look at arts and culture, they look at job opportunities. But Hamilton wasn't really matching up to their perceptions. But when we did a statistical analysis of correlating people who had actually traveled outside the bubble and people who were reporting negative views, there's a strong correlation between people who hadn't traveled outside and were reporting the negative views. So we had a strong case that we presented to the City Council in December 2011, and we've presented to our Ward 1 Councillor, Ban McHattie. And there have been a few positive things to come out of it, but overall, what's frustrating for myself is there isn't an overall citywide strategy coming from the city government to really make this a priority for the city.
Yeah. Those people, those numbers that you referred to in the survey, did you find that when students did get out of the bubble and got involved in the city, or indeed did look for opportunities, did they find them? Were there opportunities for students?
I think that was another frustration, that while the results became more and more positive as the frequency of their visits, if you correlated them, the people were still like reporting the biggest frustration they had was a lack of jobs, or perceived lack of jobs. And if you look at the media, Hamilton over the past couple of years since survey has increased the jobs by 20 or 30,000, but we're still not sure how many student jobs are out there. Some other cities have done a good job of highlighting the student jobs that are available in the city. So City of Calgary and City of Waterloo in our research has shown up as a good example, where their website's really intuitive, it's really student focused, and they have a specific student portal, whereas our website of City Hamilton is stuck in the 20th century. So it's a lot to expect for them to have anything of that sort. So I think people have a small window of time, I think in March or April, where they'll go out and look for jobs, and if they have nowhere to go when it comes to Hamilton, they have an obvious, how should I frame it, incentive to go back home, because they don't have to pay rent, they don't have to pay for food. So if Hamilton has to entice people, it has to happen in the summer as well as during the school year. So while they're in school, they have another incentive to go downtown, which personally I've done, because I worked for all four of my years all across Hamilton. So I've seen the East End, I've seen the North End, I've seen the Mountain, and for that reason, I guess I have a much better view of Hamilton than some of my peers.
Yeah. So then what is being done at the moment then to perhaps alert students on campus to the opportunities in Hamilton, or to find these jobs and these opportunities in the city? What actually is being done as far as youth retention strategy in Hamilton?
I think from the university's end, the Student Success Center has recently created a few partnerships with different employers downtown, and as well as City of Hamilton. So a few weeks ago, we at the Hamilton Convention Center, we had Connect to Jobs, which was a combined jobs fair with Mohawk University and McMaster University. And we had several thousand students show up and connect to employers with the City of Hamilton. But that's just an isolated example. This past summer, Councillor McHattie hosted a meeting between myself and different stakeholders in the city. But while they were all isolated in their interest, there was no cohesion within the room on what is it that they can do to help create student jobs. So one of the, I wouldn't call it excuses, but one of the barriers from the City of Hamilton itself was that a lot of the jobs are unionized, and unions don't want student interns, or don't want unpaid student interns, because that's not within the collective agreement. So for example, if a staff member has to train a student intern for the summer, that has to be built into the collective bargaining agreement, which are another complicated factor. When it comes to the private sector, there's no tax incentive, there's no grant or loan incentive from any form of government to really incentivize them to hire students. I know the federal government, the provincial government have some form of loans and grants, but that's clearly not enough, because they create a small number of jobs for the number of people we have. I think it's 500 for the federal grant.
So it's very difficult, though, for the school to do anything if the city isn't able to offer the incentives and the opportunities on there. What would that look like? What would a youth retention strategy from the city look like in your best case scenario, perhaps?
In my best case scenario, I think it's a number of angles, and I'm currently working on a report that I'm going to submit to the Mayor of Hamilton before I leave my office. So there's a number of angles you can look at it. Well, one of the angles that we've been recently exploring is that City of Vancouver, City of Waterloo have really incentivized knowledge clusters. So that's a priority for the City of Hamilton, that the jobs are moving away from the manufacturing sector towards the service sector, and the health sciences, the service economy. But there's a big importance for universities within that entire framework. So McMaster Innovation Park, which is on Longwood, has created numerous student jobs. But they're still facing barriers when it comes to zoning, when it comes to acquisition of cheap land into expanding McMaster Innovation Park. Because if you look at Scandinavian universities in Sweden, in Finland, their universities aren't just a couple of hundred acres. They're up to 1,000 acres, because around the universities they have local businesses entirely supported by the municipal tax regime, municipal zoning bylaws that help students find jobs and create new startup companies, create new entrepreneurships. And I think for me that kind of correlates to 85% of students saying the number one priority they have when it comes to evaluating a city is how many jobs and entrepreneurship opportunities they have. So we're going to be submitting a proposal to help facilitate these knowledge clusters. But on the very basic level, I think we need a centralized portal aimed at students that where the city government goes out to all the employers that they know of, all their internal departments, and finds all the student jobs they can, and creates incentives for those employers to create additional student jobs, and then puts them all in one pot.
So perhaps even a dedicated office at the city.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Interesting. And then of course then the second side of that would be through the website, the online portal. Interesting.
I would say so.
We're almost out of time, but just in a real nutshell, what would you say the average citizen of Hamilton can do? Is there anything the citizenry of Hamilton can do to include students or to reach out to McMaster University?
I think like what the average citizen of Hamilton can do is, I think they should spend a bit more time trying to understand the students and trying to gain a better appreciation of all of what they do. So within McMaster, I've been involved in a number of community engagement task forces that are kind of looking at what is it that McMaster students are doing in the city of Hamilton. And unbeknownst to like most of the city, they actually do a lot than what is reported in the media. So a number of nursing students are in the health sector, in the community hubs, providing healthcare as part of this academic internship to a number of communities. There's a number of business students out there in the community volunteering for a number of organizations pro bono. There's a number of students, I'd say like at least a few thousand that are out there in the community that just don't get the recognition that they deserve. So perhaps like I think the first step would be for every citizen to welcome students from McMaster as possible future residents, and not just as temporary, here for 4 or 5 years and going to leave us with a mess entities. So I think a lot of students did report that they never felt as if they were part of the city, and while that is initially geographical, it could also be cultural, where the city never sees McMaster as part of them.
Certainly. Very interesting. Huzaifa, thank you so much for coming on the program.
No worries. Thank you.
There aren't that many hybrid shows like ours, so there are a lot of vintage clothing shows or vintage jewelry shows or antique furniture shows, but nothing that really brings them all together.
The set for our city provided by Hanson Lubers, located at 144 James Street North in downtown Hamilton. I'm sitting here with Andreana Hudson of the Vintage Marketplace, an event coming to the Hamilton Convention Center very, very soon. In fact, a week from now, roughly. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us what is the Vintage Marketplace?
So it's a 2-day vintage lifestyle shopping event. So it takes place Saturday and Sunday at the Convention Center, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. each day. And it celebrates everything that the vintage lifestyle has to offer. So vintage clothing and jewelry, furniture and home decor, vintage inspired kind of modern collections as well, and everything in between. We've got some cars, things for people to look at, entertainment. We have a fashion show each day. Some local flavors of Hamilton, local bake shops, green smoothie bar just down the street will be there as well. So lots to see and do and buy.
Wow. So I'm going to ask you to kind of define vintage, but I know it's not really, these 5 years or these 10 years or anything. So when you say vintage, what is it that you're generally referring to?
Well, I mean, specifically, there are different categories that are defined by year. So antique tends to be 100 years or more. retro is anything 20 years, at least 20 years old, and then vintage is everything in between. But we're a vintage lifestyle show, so there will be actual, as defined, vintage items for sale, but also things that are inspired by vintage. There are some jewelry vendors that make jewelry of their own, that they use a vintage jewelry to create new and found items, upcycled furniture that starts as a vintage piece and is modernized that way. So it can be both spectrums.
And you mentioned cars.
Yes.
So are these cars for sale or just for exhibit?
No, just for something for people to see and do. We anticipate there will be a lot of ladies coming out to shop, and some men as well, but things for people to see and experience. We wanted it to be a 360-degree experience. So not just, you don't just have to come in and buy things and spend money. You can also come in and take a look at the cars, and the owners of the cars will be there to talk about, their passion project, which are these cars. We have someone bringing in an old projector, and he's going to talk about how that works and show it off as well. So just something for people to experience and to educate themselves as well on.
Now the shopping.
Yes.
What can people buy?
Everything. So I would say about 90% of the vendors there are selling products, and about 10% are services. So they can buy clothing, jewelry, furniture, collectibles. We have a wedding inspiration section. Vintage weddings are very popular right now, and in order to purchase or rent items to make the wedding a full vintage experience, there are very niche kind of vendors in the area that specialize in that. So we've tried to gather a small collection of them so that brides have something to work with when they're planning their vintage wedding
and
as well.
right in time for spring, because this is April.
Yes.
So perfect.
Exactly.
So you mentioned a little bit some of these niche vendors. So who comes to a show like this and who exhibits? Are these local vintage exhibitors or who comes to this stuff?
When we started to put the marketplace together, we really focused on the local vintage vendors, and there are a lot of them. You've got James Street North, which we're on right now, Concession, Ottawa, Locke Street. There are all these little pockets that are very rich of vintage vendors. But as we started to get the word out, and as we started to go out to vendors and tell our story, we found that people were coming from everywhere and wanted to be a part of the show. I think there aren't that many hybrid shows like ours, so there are a lot of vintage clothing shows or vintage jewelry shows or antique furniture shows, but nothing that really brings them all together under one roof, which a lot of the vendors really liked the idea of, and so.
Yeah. So how many square feet are you selling? How big is this show?
We have about 50 10 by 10 spots.
Wow.
Which make up about 40 vendors. So some vendors have a larger booth than others, and there'll be over 40 vendors.
So there's tons to see.
Yes,
tons to see.
Lots to see and do and hear. We have DJ Donna Lovejoy, who's a local DJ, and she spins vinyl hits of the past, and she'll be the soundtrack to our event. So lots of extra things to do.
And now when people come to this, they pay tickets at the door, right? And they can get tickets through your website as well, or?
Tickets are for sale at the Green Smoothie Bar, which is on James Street North, in advance, or at the door.
Okay. And the revenue for these tickets, you've tied in kind of a cool component here that a lot of trade shows or expos may not do. So tell us what that is and why you've done it.
So again, when we started to put the event together, it really came out of our passion as Hamiltonians for the vintage districts and markets in the area, and my business partner is a vintage retailer herself. And so it was really community-based. We have 3 great community partners as well that are our presenting sponsors, Decor on a Dime and Sheraton Hotel, and Judy Marcel's Real Estate. And so it was really all about community. And we thought the best way to encompass all of that was to give back as well. And so I happen to be on the cabinet for Gen Next, which is a group of young professionals in Hamilton who fundraise specifically for the United Way of Burlington and Greater Hamilton. And so we are donating proceeds from the door entrance fee. As well, we're having a silent auction each day, a charity silent auction, and that's all going to Gen Next United Way and going right back to our local branch of the United Way.
Great. Now, you just mentioned your business partner.
Yes.
So tell us who's behind the Vintage Marketplace?
So my business partner is Lauren Erickson, and she is actually about to open a vintage shop on James Street North in the next few months as well. So she was really the catalyst for getting this started, because she had an online shop and was always looking for venues to go and set up a pop-up shop and sell her vintage items, and there wasn't really anything in Hamilton. We were traveling to other shows outside of our own city to research and investigate and shop ourselves, and so she really came up with the idea to build something in Hamilton for Hamiltonians so that, you know, we could participate in these types of events in our own community. And we've also got an intern. Her name is Emma, and she's absolutely wonderful. She's from Mohawk College.
Okay.
She's from the advertising program that I graduated from myself, and so she's been helping us largely with the social media component and getting to learn how an event runs from start to finish as well. So it's the three of us.
Interesting. So what is it about the city of Hamilton, perhaps, that speaks to vintage or makes this a good place to do a vintage show? Is this a vintage-loving city? I know Lock Street used to have a lot of antique shops, and there is a lot of that sort of stuff, but how do you see the city of Hamilton being a good venue for this type of show?
Well, so there's all those pockets that we talked about, the James Street and the Lock Street and Concession and Ottawa, but as well, Hamilton just has a great kind of entrepreneurial spirit, and it's really right now in a time where it's looking back on its heritage and history. And so there's a lot, you know, when you consider just the shops that exist that already have a large following, and people's inclination right now to be really looking back and celebrating the history of Hamilton, it's the right time to introduce something like this to the marketplace. And we've had great responses from, you know, people of all different ages and experiences. You've got, you know, your 20 and 30 somethings that are really into the fashion of vintage and the unique pieces, but then you've also got that other demographic that really gets into it for the collector's items and the nostalgia of it. Okay. So it's really widespread as far as its, you know, audience.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had to say this is my target audience, who would it be? But I guess it's both of those groups and everyone in between, and you know, obviously our social media following tends to be the younger demographic, but we also get feedback from those that go from event to collect items. And well, it's really interesting because just a few episodes ago we had Mark from Dr. Disc sitting here,
I saw that, yes.
And a good chunk of their business is in fact selling vinyl, and so actually these old records that you have to kind of look far and wide for, but they're almost vintage, really.
No, they are vintage. Exactly vintage.
By the definition.
Yeah, and I think vintage, when it's authentically vintage, it really deals in a different level of quality and creation that perhaps things are created in these days. They are standout pieces, they're unique, they're not sold en masse, so there's not, you know, hundreds of other people with these items in their collection or in their homes, and they're lasting, and they're just something that you can't find. They're
kind of one of a kind, and I guess to finally show up at a show like this, they will have had to have stood the test of time, at least for several years, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what's next for Vintage Marketplace? For you, for Lauren, are you looking to do this on every year, or what are you thinking? Yeah,
I mean, we set very ambitious goals for ourselves as a first-year show. There hasn't been something like this in Hamilton before, and you know, with my experience having worked on large events in the past, very different events than this, but large events, we had a really succinct view of what the show could be 5 years down the road, and we endeavored to make the show that now. And so our goal is really just to make this a successful event this year for our vendors and for attendees, and then just to grow that. Our intention is to make it an annual event, and we can grow in the experiences that we bring to the show, so outside of just the shopping, and grow in vendors year over year as well.
Definitely. Well, I think it's an interesting concept, and I think you're onto something exciting. I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Again, if people do want tickets, they can go to your website to find out more about the show, but they can go to Green Smoothie Bar just on James Street North to purchase tickets and buy them at the door.
At the door as well.
Excellent.
Yes.
Andreana, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
That's our show for today. Thanks for joining us on Our City. We'll be back again on Monday, April 22nd with a brand new episode. Until then, I'm your host, Martinus Geleynse. Good night. Speaking about a vintage lifestyle show coming to the convention center here in downtown Hamilton, a vintage lifestyle show. So stick around.